There was an object glowing that green color about 25 feet over our heads, completely still, not making any sound. It was round, about the size of a car, and it was just floating there, hovering there. So we stood there, and it didn't move at all. And we ended up standing there underneath this thing for about half an hour. We weren't afraid. We were given a message not to be afraid.
Back in the end of last summer, I got an email from someone named Reinhard, who just wrote a book about someone that he met at a party that told him a crazy UFO story. Now, I gotta be honest, when I first got this email, I was very skeptical. And this was the first time that someone had contacted me and offered me to send me their book. Should I give this person my personal home address? What if there's some crazy person? But then I reminded myself why I started this channel. To find out the truth. And if someone took the time to write a book and to reach out to me, the least I can do is hear them out. So I reluctantly sent them my address and honestly kind of forgot about it. Until one day, literally the day before I was leaving for vacation, I got a package in the mail. And it was a book called The Orb Incident by Reinhard Denke. I was excited. I thought I had some reading material for my trip. And boy, was that an understatement. Because once I started reading this book, I could not put it down. It almost felt like all the stories that we hear about UAP and UFOs are starting to form this puzzle. And this experience seemed like a missing piece of that puzzle. Now, the experiencer wants to remain anonymous, and in the book, he goes by EB. And throughout the book, it was very clear that EB does not want to go public about this information. So while I was very intrigued, I thought to myself, there's no way that EB is going to sit down and talk to me. Like, he seemed too guarded. So I reached out to Reinhard, the author, and I said, I'm in. What can I do to get this story out there? Do you think EB will actually speak to me? And it turns out he did, but not without stipulations. He didn't want to show his face. So if you're wondering why he's wearing a COVID mask and sunglasses and a hat, it's not because he was sick or a weirdo. He just wants his identity protected. And I can't necessarily blame him for that. So buckle in, because this is one crazy ride that includes watching a UFO for 30 minutes, missing time, medical issues that seem to be a result of the experience, vivid dreams, and shared experiences. I'll just leave it at that for now. I don't think you're ready for this one.
Just tell you, you don't know me, you read the book, but I can just tell you, if it gives you any degree of comfort or confidence, believe it. That's what I would tell you. That's what I would tell everyone. Just believe it, because it's real. And I had no intention of being involved in any of this, and haven't done anything with it until meeting Reinhard. He's the only person that's ever heard the whole story up until the book. So anyway, going to June 29th, 1982, I was in upstate New York. The weather was extremely hot and humid, and I was in a dorm room that had no air conditioning, no fan. The window was open, but there was no breeze. and I was with one of my classmates. I was in a summer program up there on a university campus. It was too hot to sleep. It was too hot, really, to even just sit around and talk. So, my suggestion to her, and she was just a very good friend, my suggestion was let's leave the dorm and go out to an area that I was very familiar with, which was a stream and a waterfall, a wooded area, not too far from the dorm, but I knew exactly how to get there because I'd been there before, alone, always during the daytime. Well, this was between, I'd say, 2:30 and 3 in the morning when I came up with that idea. She was fine with it, and she put on her bathing suit and shorts. I was already wearing shorts and a t-shirt, and we took the hike down there. It was pitch black. It wasn't an area that people would hang out in. There was no one around. And so we went to the stream and the waterfall. The waterfall was probably, I would say, 8 to 10 feet. And the water was flowing over it, and that was what was feeding the stream. And we stood under the water, and it felt fantastic. It was cold, and it's exactly what we needed. It was so wonderful. After maybe a minute or two, I just happened to look down into the stream, and there were plants that were attached to the rocks, very stringy kind of, those plants. I don't know what they're called in the stream, and they kind of flow with the water. They move, and they were glowing a very bright green color. The first thing that popped into my mind was that it reminded me of Phosphorescent Bay in Puerto Rico, which is where we used to go when I was a kid. We'd go for vacation to Puerto Rico. And there was a certain kind of algae in the water, and if it became excited by movement, it would glow. That's why they called it Phosphorescent Bay. And tourists would go out there, and it was cool. So when I saw the little plants moving in the water, and they were glowing green, I said to the girl that was with me, look at that. I think I know why that's happening. And I explained it to her, and she said, oh, okay, that's fine. And then I just looked up a little bit, and I noticed that the moss that was growing on the base of the trees was also glowing the same green color. And then I looked around and I noticed that plants on the ground in the area were also glowing the same green color. So I said to her, wait a minute, it can't be the same phenomenon as Phosphorescent Bay because those plants are not in the water. They're not moving. So I just tilted my head up to see what the source of the light that I was seeing might be. And there was an object, the same green color, glowing that green color, about 25 feet over our heads, completely still, not making any sound, not making any like downdraft, or there was no movement whatsoever. It was completely still. It was round, perfectly round, about the size of a car, an average car. And it was just floating there, hovering there. And that was unbelievable. I mean, it wasn't like something that you see flying across the sky in a streak. It wasn't like a plane going over. It wasn't like anything I'd ever seen before. It wasn't like anything most people have ever seen before. So we stood there, and she was just as fascinated by it as I was. And it didn't move at all. And we ended up standing there underneath this thing for about half an hour, which I didn't know at the time because I had no experience with this topic. I was 25 at the time. There was no internet, there weren't really movies out that I had seen about this kind of thing. So I had nothing really to compare it to except maybe cartoons or old science fiction movies, but this was different. And one of the things that was so important about it, and that I stressed a lot when I talked to Reinhardt about it, was that we weren't afraid. We were told It's the best way I can describe it is to just say we were given a message not to be afraid, that everything was fine and there was nothing to be concerned about. And we didn't panic. Really, the only conversation we had at that moment was me saying to her, "Are you seeing this?" And her saying, "Yeah." It was just kind of like paralyzing with by being fascinated, not by anything negative. There was no negative feeling from it. So we stood directly underneath it for about a half an hour. And I can explain how I know that. I mean, I wasn't wearing a watch and checking it, but as we watched it and stood there and just took this sight in, and by the way, when I say that it was glowing green, I want to be clear that the object itself, which I called an orb when Reinhard and I were discussing it, the object itself was not green, and it was not, the green glow wasn't attached to the object. It was like an aura that was at the bottom. It wasn't, when we were at first just standing directly under it, we couldn't tell that it was not surrounding the entire thing. But later, in a couple of minutes, we did notice. But there was a very slight kind of separation between the actual orb itself, which looked like pewter, like a very dull metallic look, and then this green glow was just emanating from the bottom of it. So we stood there and we watched it, and then it just suddenly began to bounce up and down like a basketball being dribbled. And
Could you elaborate how many minutes in that happened?
okay. So out of the 30 minutes, I would say probably 27 minutes. It was almost at the end of the observation, the encounter with this thing. It started to bounce up and down, just like this, like a basketball being dribbled, but it was only going down a couple of feet and up a couple of feet. It wasn't a big bounce. It was just a very slight movement, and perfectly in the center of the clearing that we were in. It didn't move to the left or the right, just very slightly up and down. And as fast as it started doing that, it stopped back in the original position. And then it immediately started flying what I describe as lump segments. It would fly to the right for a few feet and stop dead. There was no drift. It was very precise. It would fly to the right, stop, then fly back across the center of the clearing, stop, then go on another angle to another edge of the clearing and stop. And it was just flying these patterns around at random. It wasn't like it was making stars or triangles. It was just a very random thing, pretty fast. And then it came back to the center and stopped again. And it stayed probably for 30 seconds to a minute and then took off. And when I say it took off, I mean this thing flew away so fast, it crossed the entire part of the sky that we could see in I was going to say in a blink of an eye. No. Like a thousandth of the blink of an eye. It just took off and vanished. And there was still no sound. I told Reinhard during our interview that I had seen many flying things that most people don't get to see in their life. I've seen fighter jets that, with their afterburners, come screaming out of a war zone, where the sonic boom knocks you down because they're flying so low. It wasn't like that. There was no sonic boom. There were no rotors, motors, jets, no wheels, no doors, no windows, nothing like that. But when it was bouncing up and down is when we were able to see that the green glow did not encompass the entire object. After that, we left. And again, there was no fear, there was no panic, there was no concern. It was just an amazing experience. Like I've said to Reinhard before, that was the good part, because a lot of things that happened after that, most things that happened after that, were not good. And yeah, you want me to keep going?
Yeah, I mean, you did a great job explaining that in a short amount of time. The book, it's I don't know, maybe like 20 or 30 pages of that experience in more detail, but that was a great synopsis. I think a good starting point for our listeners to kind of get a general understanding of what you experienced. And I just want to emphasize a couple of points there too. 30 minutes is a long time. That's a considerable amount of time to be looking at this orb. And that really stuck out to me while reading the book, that this is not a lot of encounters you hear about from people. It's you see this orb, maybe 30 seconds is like a long time. This is 30 minutes. So I can't emphasize that enough. And the amount of detail that's in the book about this orb is absolutely insane. So definitely check it out. But I guess a couple questions I just wanted to bring up about the experience first before we go into the aftermath of what happened. So I interviewed a guy from Australia. His name's Clark Watson, and he had an experience off the coast of Australia where he was at a golf resort at a hotel, and he saw the first part of his encounter was these orbs that he saw. Like, he says that they were dancing around over the ocean. And the part that really kind of, like I said earlier, that it kind of connected some of these dots was he said that they started to form this wheel, essentially, is the way that he described it, where this orb would kind of jut out to as a spoke of a wheel, and then kind of return back to the center, and then it was moving so quickly that it almost was forming this wheel in the glow of this orb. And it wasn't a green color, I don't believe, in his story, but the geometric pattern that you described and Clark Watson's encounter, and other people have described this too. Even in the Bible, there's Ezekiel's wheel, and people often, surmise that are these things that people are seeing present day. Were they seeing them back then? And people just were describing them as the wheel. So before we continue your story, I just kind of wanted to bring that up to you. And do you have any thoughts about that in terms of what you saw and the stories in the Bible with Ezekiel's wheel? Do you find that there's any connection there? Do you think from your experience?
I think, first of all, I totally believe that he saw that. I get the distinct impression, I don't know what he saw happening. The fact that it was flying in a pattern very quickly, and that it was a glowing object, I totally get it. I understand that. And like I said, I do believe it. Not knowing more about it, I do believe that he saw something like that. I got the very distinct impression at some point that when it started to fly in the patterns, that it was scanning the ground, because it was moving in a way that I've seen medical equipment move when it's doing a scan. That's what it looked like, but that's many, many years later when I was able to associate. But in the moment, I thought, it's scanning, it's photographing, it's doing something, because it's getting everything from every angle. Now, I didn't know what the significance was of, why is it doing this? But that's what it did. That's all I can tell you, is that's what it did. And it was a just amazing thing to see, especially like you said, for that long. And if it would have gone on longer, I would have loved it. I would have stayed there and watched. It was very cool. I had no doubt in my mind at the time that this was nothing from here. This was nothing that we on this planet were able to put together at that time. I don't think it was anything we could put together at this time. So, and I want to say I know that, but there's really, other than me telling you certain things, I don't know. I can't prove it.
Yeah.
I know, but I know it. So, and I know it for various reasons, but I'm just saying I knew it in the moment. If I continue from when it flew away, that's when the next thing that happened is really so scary to me that it still bothers me 43 years later, and it still bothers me. It still scares me. And that is that the dining hall or the dorm was in the basement of the building. And at 8:30, usually 8:30 in the morning is when 8 or 8:30 is when they would serve breakfast. And there was really nowhere else to go at that time because school was not in session for most of the campus. So in the morning, probably about 4 hours after the encounter, we were sitting at the table having breakfast, and it was me and the girl, Delilah, who was with me out at the Waterfall, and my friend Jack, who was from West Virginia, this hillbilly, great guy, really, really funny, nice guy, who had the room next to me. He was sitting on the other side of me, and I was very excitedly telling everyone at the table about what had just happened to us a few hours earlier out in the woods. And nobody believed me. The other students were just looking at me like I was crazy and, making jokes. Jack didn't say anything, but Delilah was nodding along with me. And suddenly it hit me very hard. How did we get to breakfast? How did we go from, wow, that thing just flew away, that was amazing, and now the next thing I know, we're sitting at breakfast, eating, talking. In other words, I had no way of remembering, how did we get from the waterfall back to the dorm? Weren't we talking on the way back to the dorm? Wouldn't we have had a conversation about what we had just witnessed? But I had no recollection of any of it. All I knew was I was sitting at breakfast and had no idea how I got there. I don't know if you've ever had an experience like this. It was such an immediate onset of anxiety and panic. I thought I was losing my mind because I didn't know how I got there. I didn't even remember walking from my dorm room down to the dining hall. I just literally went from one place to the other with nothing in between. When I said to Delilah at the table, this is weird because what happened? I mean, did we walk back and then change, and she just looked at me and shook her head. I mean, and shrugged. She was like, I don't know, like, what happened? That was terrifying. So the way that I know the time, let me say that, is that when we went out there, by the time we reached the waterfall, I would say it was 3 o'clock in the morning. Viewed it for a half an hour, probably out there for a total of maybe 35 minutes, and then walked back. And then we're at the dorm, and then we were at breakfast at, I would say, 8:30 in the morning. So I know when we left the dorm, I know how much the total elapsed time would have been. But there's a big piece of it that doesn't exist for me.
I've never had an experience like that, but I do remember when I had gallbladder surgery, whatever, I had my gallbladder removed, and I was a little bit nervous because I'd never had anesthesia before. And everyone kept telling me, oh, it's just like time travel. Like you're gonna be on the operating table and you're gonna wake up and you're gonna be in the recovery room. It's gonna happen in a blink of an eye. And
Right.
as you're telling it, that's the only frame of reference that I can really like personally kind of call from. So would you say that I'm not sure if you ever had, I think you have had surgery from, not to jump ahead, but I think you've had things like that. So is that, would you say that's a close resemblance of kind of what it was like? Although you weren't having surgery, you were just under the waterfall or near the waterfall, and then boom, next thing you know, you teleported basically.
I would say yes, but there's a couple of differences. One is that when an anesthesiologist puts you out, they tell you you're about to go out now.
Yeah, count
And
backwards from 100 or whatever it is. Yeah.
yeah, think of a good place that you want to go on vacation and I'll send you there. That's what one anesthesiologist said to me once.
Yeah.
And but you know you're going out and then you are waking up in recovery and there's nothing in between. Even in a procedure like a colonoscopy where a doctor's talking to you, he's having a conversation with you while the procedure's happening. I mean, I don't know what they're talking about, but you don't remember that conversation.
Right.
So, and the more time goes by, the less you remember of the whole experience. But there was no lead up to this. There was just a blank piece of time from when the thing flew away to us at the breakfast table. You would think that I would remember climbing back up the hill with her. We would have been talking to each other a mile a minute about this experience. I was wearing shorts, but I wasn't wearing shorts at breakfast. I was dressed at breakfast. I can't tell you what happened. It's the weirdest, scariest thing. And I really thought that I was losing my mind. And at that time in my life, I'd never had an anxiety attack before or a panic attack. I didn't even know what that was. So that was terrifying. Um, and then later, I didn't go to class. I walked downtown. There was a little college town not far from the campus, and I went on my own and walked downtown. I just wanted to distract myself, just go shopping, get something to eat, do something. And as I was walking, I saw and sensed that the sidewalk was coming up to hit me in the face. That's what I saw. And but really what was happening is that I was falling flat on my face. I didn't trip on anything. I just fell straight forward and face planted into the sidewalk. There were people around that kind of helped me up. And one guy suggested I go to the hospital. I didn't want to. He offered to drive me, and I didn't want him to. But I did end up going. I ended up walking there. And I was examined. And the only part of the examination that I would say is important, the results of the examination, is that the doctor drew blood and fully examined me. And afterwards, she asked me why, what I was doing at school during the summer. And I told her I was in this summer law program. And she said, so you must be really like stressed out. And I said, no, because I'm not really even going to class. I'm doing the minimum amount of work, so no. And then she told me, well, I don't really find anything wrong with you. She said, except you are having a profound stress reaction or under a tremendous amount of stress. And she said, I think you blacked out from that. And I did not even put two and two together. What was stressful that was happening in my life? Nothing that I could think of. It definitely wasn't school, but I did not associate the experience the night before with stress because it wasn't stressful.
Do you do you think, and I'm kind of jumping really ahead here, so I apologize, but I'm just, it's a question that I have to ask. Do you think you were abducted that night? Like, is that, knowing this, the whole rest of the story, and again, we're going to get to the rest of it, but I think now is probably a good time to ask that question because, you know, post-traumatic stress, there's a saying, what's the saying? The body keeps the score. So, sometimes people are in stressful situations and sometimes they don't even remember what happened to them necessarily. But, I've even personally experienced that with some trauma that I've had earlier in my life, where just recently, actually, I kind of, through therapy and stuff, I realized, holy shit, my body's still holding on to this stressful event that happened to me and causing me anxiety and panic attacks and things like that. So do you think that that's what happened to you? Is that night, you witnessed something and then you were abducted in some fashion, and then they use some sort of form of you being put under of something, and then you became two in the morning? That's kind of what makes sense to me, but I want to know if that's kind of where your head's at.
In the beginning, I didn't think anything. And when things started happening, I didn't connect them to that experience. It wasn't until many, many, many years later, and I would say fairly recently, that I had very strong impressions of being inside something that was scary and odd. And I think, if anything, I don't want to use the word abducted, but I would say that I have a very strong impression that we were allowed to see what this orb was. We were there. We went inside of it, and then we're back on the ground. I don't know when that would have happened. Did that happen after? It couldn't have happened after it flew away, but I can't really tell you when during the experience that would have happened. But the impression that I had much, much later in life was seeing the interior of a large space that had curved walls. It had no furniture inside of it. It really had nothing inside of it. And I had a very scary sensation that someone or something was standing right behind me. And I described it to Reinhard during the interview as that thing when you're a kid. It happened to me when I was a kid, standing with my back to a dark room. I was standing in the doorway, and behind me was a very dark room. That kind of feeling where your skin crawls or the hair stands up on the back of your neck, like something could be right behind me that's going to grab me now. It was that kind of feeling, like, oh, I'm standing here. Something is right here with me that's not good. It's not a good thing. And the last thing that's in the book, if I'm not mistaken, is some information that I found that I sent to Reinhard, because when we were talking, I said, how is it that this orb was the size of a car on the outside, but on the inside, it was the size of a warehouse? How is that physically possible? I mean, I'm not a scientist. I'm not a mathematician. I'm not good at that stuff. Is that possible in some way, that something that we perceive as a small object on the outside actually is very big on the inside?
So there actually are real theories in physics that suggest that this might be possible. Under Einstein's theory of relativity, space itself isn't fixed. It can bend and stretch. So in theory, something could appear small on the outside, but the space inside could be expanded. Concepts like wormholes or curved space geometry suggest you could enter a small opening and end up in a much larger internal space. It sounds like science fiction, but the math behind it is real. That said, we have no known technology that could actually do this. It would require extreme energy and physics far beyond what we currently understand. Now, back to the episode. Clark Watson's story. I'm going to bring it up again, the one where the Ezekiel's wheel and stuff. And I'm really bad at this. I need to get better at this. I need to take some alpha brain or something to help me remember things better. But I was watching Area 52 Investigations episode. I forget the guest. I will add it on the screen here and maybe put a clip in. There's this guy who has a theory about these orbs that people are seeing, and I wanted to just bring it up real quick before we move on to the medical things that you've experienced. But his theory is that these orbs are like an AI neural network around our globe, and they've been here for centuries, millennium even, and they're kind of like they're like almost like a grid pattern around our Earth, and they're used for like surveillance essentially, like, which would kind of go in line with what you were saying, where it was kind of scanning the ground and collecting information. And in Clark's story, these orbs, you saw them dancing around, and the next thing that happened was actually really terrifying. He said that there was a triangular craft that was over his hotel room, and he saw like the three lights in it, and he said that this craft looked alive. It looked like he used the word starfish, like it looked like a sea creature, but it was a huge triangular craft. And he said when he saw this thing, I'm getting like shaken up like talking about it, because it still freaks me out to this day, because he's just like you. He's no reason to lie about this stuff. And he said he just had this tremendous sense of fear that overcame him. The orbs were fine, but this craft was not. And he actually videoed it. And it almost took control of his mind. He had to like force his arm up, and he did record it. And anyway, the reason I'm saying all this is he didn't get the recording, because the next morning he woke up and he had the recording of the orbs, but the recording of the triangular creature, craft, whatever you want to call it, was gone. But he did have the orbs. Anyway, it seems like these orbs perhaps are these surveillance crafts, potentially, which would make sense. And I'm wondering perhaps if when you saw this thing zip away and it flew out of the sky, if the next thing that happened was some sort of other craft that you don't remember came, similar to Clark's story, because there's so much similarity there and so much overlap that, maybe that's where that, I'm not going to call it PTSD, but that stressful event that kind of led us to where you had that, you collapsed and you went to the doctor and things like that. I wonder if that is something that potentially happened. Like this, again, I'm going to go off on a limb here, that this orb maybe located you or was doing its thing. There were these two humans there, Delilah and you, zipped away, and then in came another craft to perhaps take you in. Maybe that's also why it seemed bigger, because it was a different craft. I don't know. I'm rambling at this point, but I just wanted to get that out and see what your thoughts are on any of that. If that makes sense at all, or am I pondering too much?
No, my immediate reaction to that is I don't want to even think that that's what happened, because that is scary to me, just like it was to him. I don't even want to think about that. I can't tell you whether or not the orbs or the one that I encountered is doing surveillance. Maybe, I don't know, but I can tell you, like I described to Reinhard during the interview, these things have been here forever. They're not just arriving. It's not since the 1940s, and that's not what's happening. I mean, I have a lot of things about like that I can tell you. How I know, I don't know. When people say, come on, the nearest planet that could send some type of life to this place, it would take this much time to get here, and then they're going to do whatever, and then it would take that much time for it to get back, and it's impossible, it's too much time. And my answer to that is always the same. That's only if they're coming here from someplace, but they're not coming here from someplace. They came here before we were here. So they're not traveling. It's not a matter of how long will it take for them to get here from X. That's not what's happening. So I can't tell you more than that. All I can tell you is that we're the visitors. They were here, so we're squatting pretty much on their property. But the other thing that goes hand in hand with that for me is for the people that are out there. This is why I don't like to have anything to do with this topic outside of what I've done with Reinhard. Now talking to you, uh, is because when I hear people talk about how, you know, aliens are coming here to enslave us, aliens are coming here to destroy us, aliens are coming here to bring us back to their planet for whatever, or they're coming here to experiment on us or whatever it is. So ridiculous to me, having experienced what I did, even with all the negative in the aftermath. I will just say there is no point to that. That's us not being able to get out of a very basic mindset that we learned from TV and movies and comic books and other stuff. There is no point to that. If something, I shouldn't even say if, life forms that are infinitely more developed than we are have no use for any of that. If something could create the technology necessary to do everything that they're doing, they don't need slaves on their planet. It's so stupid to think about it. That's a movie.
It
It's
really
not
is.
real.
Yeah.
And do they need to come here to what? They're going to hover over the White House and the Kremlin and whatever? And no, why?
No.
Why would they need to do that?
There's no, I couldn't agree with that more. I just read something about that too, where like, even now, we're primitive compared to these creatures from everything I've heard and read. And even now, we have like those Tesla robots, and there's other companies that are making these AI robots that can do our dishes and laundry and things like that. And we're so primitive. So I agree with you 100%. Why would they want to make us slaves in their home planet? That's the silly thing.
Yeah, that mindset, a lot of science fiction movies were produced after World War II. And World War II put us in this certain mindset of the invaders are evil. And they're here to do bad things. And that World War II Cold War mentality is very much in science fiction movies and in literature, except one of the greatest stories, Who Goes There, the John Campbell thing, or John Campbell thing from 1937, I think. The Thing was based on, which is pre-World War II, but, same mindset.
Yeah, excellent point. I never even put that together, that storyline kind of came after World War II, and it makes complete
they're here
sense.
for bad.
Yeah. It's in our dogma.
Yeah, it's the thing thinking. These things are terrifying, and they're here to do us harm.
If you listen to a lot of things that have been said, some recently, I guess, and some going back, there are these lizards, there are these aliens that come and they look like lizards. Okay, great. So that is right out of a human being's mind. The odds of something being from one of billions of other places that just so happens to have the appearance of a weird little creature running around here. Sorry, no. That's people not being able to get out of our own limited minds. No, they're not. They don't look like lizards. No, do they look like us? Maybe. I mean, they might look like a sponge. What difference does it make? That doesn't matter. But to say, there are these aliens coming to Earth from far away that look like lizards, and when they get here, look out. Okay, those people need to watch less movie.
Yeah, that's like the Gorn in Star Trek.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah.
There's no point to it. But I do want to make one comment about something you said earlier about the Bible. So when I say things have been here before we were here, if you ever read not just the Bible, but other, ancient writings or depictions that say, look, here's this thing scratched into a rock that's 5,000 years old, and it sure looks like what we think an alien would look like. Okay. Okay. So what is the mystery? People say, well, they first started showing up here in a certain time. No, again, get out of your very limited capability brain that you have and just accept the fact that we're basically not that much and we're not that great. Something only has to be a little bit better to just blow us away. I'm saying technologically and whatever. So, no, if you see a depiction somewhere and it's like this is thousands of years old and this is an alien, okay.
Some of them even have like space helmets on the drawing, the cave drawing.
I saw
which
those.
Is like,
yeah,
it's crazy. It's like, how can you look at that and say that's, that's 100% like a spaceman of some sort, whatever, or space thing, that it's absolutely, it's absolutely crazy.
Well, and something about EB's story that intrigued me initially was, I'm not making this connection because that would make me crazy. But in the Bible, anytime angels appear before people, what do they say first? They're not. Don't be afraid. And in EB's story, the first thing that he and Delilah felt was a sense of everything's going to be okay. I don't need to be afraid of this. And I don't think angels were cherubs and sweet with wings. I think they must have looked horrific to whoever beheld them.
Have you ever seen like the biblical or the accurate, how do you say that? The biblically accurate version of an angel?
The eyeballs and the mist. The
eyeballs
yeah.
It looks more like an orb than it does a traditional angel that you're thinking of. So yeah, there's definitely this is kind of what I was saying in the very beginning. Like there's a lot of these connections that this story kind of like connects for me, and that's one of them. Even I've been talking to a lot of people recently about DMT. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that. It's a hallucinogen that our brain actually naturally produces upon, they say it's upon death or near-death experiences, our brain will produce it. And there's like a toad in the rainforest of the Amazon, I think, that also produces it, that you can like lick the toad. That's like one of the sayings. And or smoke it, that people smoke DMT as well. And yeah, it's fascinating because you get rocketed to another plane of existence and you're high, of course, but that's subjective, I guess, what is high, I guess, in the situation. But they say that people that take DMT, they meet these beings, these entities that seem to know everything about the person, that kind of are their teachers. And they don't look like a lizard person or an alien in the traditional sense, or looks like us. They're just these geometric shapes that just,
really,
you can tell that there's an intelligence there, but it's not in our physical reality, and I don't want to get too far off the rails in that conversation, but it kind of goes to your point, EB, that, I think it's very limited in our understanding of what this phenomena is, that we try to put our human rationale on it.
And that's what a lot of it is, which is why I don't associate with it. I don't like the, it's like, it's science fiction when really it's not. People make it science fiction, but it's not science fiction. So it's real, and live with it. Just realize that this is happening. If you have an encounter with this, then just live with it. I'm not saying it's going to be fun. It might be fun. It might not be fun. But one of these days, the government or whoever is going to have to come out and tell people, okay, these things, we don't know what's happening, but these things are real. And, we're not going to keep up the story anymore, to confuse people or pacify people or whatever. I'm really looking forward to that day, just so I can say, okay, there. Now I can breathe easier and just say, now stop. stop the bullshit because it's not doing anybody any good. You're just playing into this science fiction thing, which is not real.
The good news is, though, I do think that tide is shifting. I think ever since, again, I'm not sure how much you follow this or not, but I think ever since the 2017 New York Times article, because I was very much like UEB before then. I thought all this was bullshit, and I was just like, this is crazy people that are making up stories to sell books. Essentially is what I used to think. And ever since the 2017 story, and then my father-in-law, I'm sure listeners know this story already, but he had an experience, who I very much trust him as well. His was similar to yours in some regards. I can tell you maybe after we record if you're interested in hearing it. But that changed my whole paradigm, and I've been encountering a lot of people with this show that they don't really think they're similar mindsets to what we just talked about. So I do hope for all of our sakes that it becomes more, I guess, official in the mainstream. I think it would help everything. So, let's change gears, or not change gears, but let's go back in gear. And we kind of went off the rails a little bit. I'll take the blame for it. So the last thing that we talked about with your experience is that you passed out essentially, or fainted, went to the doctor, they checked you out, and they basically said, you're under high stress and this is just a panic attack essentially. And, chill out basically was the diagnosis. So what happened after that?
Well, there's one more medical thing that happened before I went down to New York City, and I don't want to talk about it. So if people want to read about it, it's too embarrassing. And like I said, Reinhard is the only person that I ever told this to. I think you know what I'm talking about.
I do.
You do? Okay. I can't even believe that I told that to Reinhard because it's so embarrassing and weird. I don't know anything other than the way I described it to him. It happened, and it never happened before, and it never happened after. It was just, but it was all within that one time frame of coming down from this encounter. All of these things happened pretty much at the same time. Not knowing how I got to breakfast and passing out, and then this other medical thing. The next physical thing that happened was that I was going for an interview that I pretty much forced a college to give me because I wanted to get in. It was already way past the application deadline. Actually, probably everyone that was going to be admitted for the fall was already admitted. And I just persisted, and I convinced this admissions office at a school to interview me so I could talk myself into letting them allow me to start in the fall in New York. And my uncle said, you need to look good, go get a haircut. And he gave me the money. I had very long hair at the time. I went to his barber. The barber was cutting my hair short. And the barber just stopped and said, whoa, look at this. And he turned the barber chair and handed me a mirror, and so I could see it. And there was an oval about the size of an egg on the left side of my head, white. And the rest of my hair around it was not. It was just this very distinct oval of a very specific size. And I just saw it, and I was like, whoa, that's crazy. And he said, I've seen this a couple of times before. He told me what it was called. I don't remember now, but he said that this can happen with someone's hair can turn white literally overnight if they experience a tremendous fearful situation or a tremendously stressful situation. He said, this can happen. And this is how silly and unbelievable it is. I still didn't attribute that to anything. And it was really only a few days later, a few days after, probably a week after, because the 29th is when it happened. I left the college after July 4th and then went down to New York City. So it was probably a little over a week later. I was having a haircut. Here's this thing. I can't explain why it's there. The guy didn't know. He just said something about profound stress, but I still didn't connect it to anything. I didn't even connect it to the passing out in the street.
It's amazing how the body tries to protect itself from traumatic situations like that, where you would think common sense would say, well, how could you not know? You just saw this orb and I have this white spot on the side of your head. Of course, it's probably related. EB, what are you talking about? But it's amazing. I've done this myself in my personal life where like I'm having some sort of symptom. I'll just leave it broad. And I don't really realize that it's from a situation that just happened. And I have to like think about it. And it's hard to connect that sometimes.
Yeah, it didn't dawn on me. And you would think it would. But again, at that time, I didn't characterize the encounter as being stressful. That still was not an unpleasant thing. Things that were happening after were, but that was not. I was staying with my aunt and uncle in their apartment. They didn't have they did have a guest bedroom, but it wasn't set up for that. My aunt loved clothing and she had clothing racks on wheels filling up this room, and they prepared a place for me to sleep on the floor and put a TV in there for me because I was going to be there for a while, and at least a few weeks. And I was in the room watching the Letterman show late at night, and that was the original David Letterman late night show, where it wasn't just actors and actresses or musical guests or comedians or whatever. It was more like the old Tonight Show where Johnny Carson would have people on with, walnut collections.
Yeah.
So he had different kinds of guests on. And so it just so happened I was watching it that night. A guest came on. It was an African-American gentleman who was an FBI agent. His story that he told David Letterman was that he was on vacation with his sister and his sister's children in Massachusetts. He worked for the FBI out of Washington, D.C. So they were up there on vacation. The vacation was over. They were on their way back to Washington. And they were driving late at night, middle of the night. And as they were driving on this road in the middle of nowhere, something flew next to their car that was just a bright light object flying next to their car, but it was flying, I think it was one lane in each direction, and this was not in the other lane. This was off to the right side where there was no road. So it wasn't a car, wasn't a truck. This light was flying next to them at the same speed. They were looking at it and didn't know what it was, and then it took off. It just took off very quickly and boom, was gone. And I'm listening to him describe this, and I'm like, yeah, I know exactly what he's talking about. And then he said when it happened. And it happened the same night. It happened on June 29th. When he was discussing it, he was talking about how they were going from Massachusetts to Washington, D.C. And I'm thinking they could have cut through upstate New York on their way. If you look at a map, there's definitely a way to do that. And he did mention the general area, but he didn't get specific about it. But it was the same night, same light, pretty much. So in the morning, I went down to the payphone out on the sidewalk in front of my aunt and uncle's apartment, and I called the Letterman show. And I asked to speak to someone from the show who could talk to me about the guests. And this person got on the phone with me, and I said, "You had a guy on last night, the African American FBI agent. Oh, by the way, he also said that when he got back to his office and reported it, they made him take a polygraph, and they put him on like paid leave, that there was a negative repercussion to him reporting it."
Yeah.
When I was on the phone with the people from Letterman, I said, "Please give me a number where I can call the guy, because I had a similar experience that night. And if he wants me to, I can back up his story, and he can back up my story. So he can tell me something, and I can, speak on his behalf." And they said, "We can't give anyone's contact information out. We don't know who you are." So they said, "If you want to get in touch with him, call the FBI." And I did. And they wouldn't do anything. They wouldn't even acknowledge him, the show, nothing. They were just like, that's not within our policy to be able to give out contact information. They wouldn't do anything. So, and again, there was no internet then. There was nothing else I could do. But that did happen. He did tell that story on Letterman. And I wish there was a way to go back to the archives and find that show, because it would just be one more level of proof, not for me, because I don't need any, but for anyone to be able to say, "Oh yeah, that happened."
Have you ever tried to find that clip on the internet?
Yes.
Yeah.
And found nothing. But it's important, that you understand what I'm saying. I don't need proof of anything. But it would be nice to be able to point to it and say, look, I would have to be some kind of genius in the winter of 2024 to be able to tell Reinhard what happened on a Letterman episode in 1982. Why would I carry that information around with me? It's not that interesting, in and of itself. So that's one thing. By the way, I'll just bring this up because it's not in the book. This just happened very, very recently. I went on Google Earth, and I went to the location of the school, upstate New York, and I zoomed in on the law school building, and then looked exactly where I knew we walked that night, and I found the spot. And I took screenshots of those photos and put little red arrows in and sent it to Reinhard. And I said, "Look, here's the embankment that we walked down. Here's the stream. Here's the waterfall." Now, again, Google Earth did not exist in 1982. And how would I describe it? It's too weird to be able to say, I waited all of these years, and now I'm going to prove that the path I took, and the stream we stood in, and the waterfall, and all of that, and the clearing and the trees. See, here it is. I had no aerial photograph of that area in 1982.
Yeah, it's exactly the way he described. It was exactly the way I had it in my mind when he first told the story.
Fascinating.
Because I went to the University of Texas, and we had some water features, but where EB went, they're far more prominent, and he's very descriptive the way he related them to me, and it is quite striking. You also see the clearing where he would have seen the object. Even now, obviously, the trees aren't going to become a canopy. Sure.
Wow.
So they wouldn't. Trees don't grow in streams, so they're on the bank of the stream. So that's, you could see the whole thing. But again, that would have been an image I would have had to carry around in my mind since that night in June of 1982 to be able to then show Reinhard now, like a month or two. There's no, what is the point of that? But it was exciting for me to see it because I was like, there it is. I don't need the proof. I was happy to be able to show him. I just don't want anybody to. I'm okay talking to you about it. I don't want anybody showing up on my front steps wanting to, sit me down somewhere and have a conversation. I'm not interested.
Yeah.
So
I respect
I
that
do,
100%.
I do what I can to stay out of it. So, I mean, Reinhard can tell you, I've never done this before. I've never.
Oh no, he hasn't. He's never done anything like this. I mean, I was one of the few people he told the whole story to, and I'm deeply honored, but at the same time, I understand his reticence.
Yeah, and I again thank you for doing this because I know it's not easy to talk about. Even when I was emailing Reinhard back and forth, I was like, "Are you sure EB is going to actually want to talk about this?" Because even in the book, you can tell that it's a traumatic thing that happened. Even though in the incident itself, what we remember wasn't, there clearly is something there that is understandably hard to talk about. But again, it's stories like yours and other courageous people that have come out that, I'm not doing this podcast to get famous and to make a lot of money. I'm genuinely doing it to try to figure out what the heck this is. Like, I genuinely want to know. And like I mentioned, my father-in-law had an experience that kind of triggered it for me. And the type of person that I am, when I get my mind on something, like we were talking about Reinhard before he joined, I'm a crazy person. I'm working full time. I'm going to school. I'm trying to do this podcast. And when I have my mind set on something, I like lock on it, and I just can't let it go. And this story is just one of hundreds of stories, maybe even thousands of stories out there that are all similar. And I always say this, either, and I know you know this is not true, EB, but for us that have never had an experience, either it's like a collusion where everyone is reading each other's stories and just repeating it again, or they're all individually real and people are just saying what happened, which is the truth. And at first I probably would lean that it might be more collusion back before 2017 and my father-in-law having that experience. But what was that, 8 years later, I am completely flipped the other way. And I'm thinking there's absolutely no way that's the case. And that, I think, if you want to get rich and famous because of this, both of you, EB, you'd be showing your face and you'd be welcoming people coming to your door. And, that's not the case. And I don't get that sense at all. So.
And indicate the names of the buildings in the pictures. And when I was a kid, my dad worked in aerospace for years, going back to way back to the mid 50s. And he told me stories in the late 70s. He never was a loquacious man. He wasn't let me tell you a story. He never was that way. He was sort of a military type, that generation, they kept it deep inside. But I do recall him telling me that he worked with guys who had been with the Army Air Force in the 1940s, and they told him stories. So this is in the 70s. This is before this stuff really started getting out there. And by late 70s. I'm not that old. But I do remember him telling me, they at Wright Patterson, they've got stuff, and something happened in New Mexico. And so it all ties in. It's like, wow. And then, of course, like you said, in 2017, Tic Tac, the Navy pilots, that really made it seem, because those guys don't make stories up. They're serious people.
They are absolutely very serious people. Yeah, it's absolutely fascinating, and I think we all want to believe that we're not alone in this vast universe. But
Um, I think that want in most people is skeptical, which is a good thing. And it's stories like this that I think, I don't know. It's there's, I could tell that both of you like movies and science fiction like we talked about, but I could tell that you aren't doing deep dives into ufology or ufology and all the different stories. And it's amazing how much this story aligns with others and connects more dots. It's like a linchpin almost of the whole thing. So
For a piece of better getting to know me better, and that is over the years. If there was someone I worked with in an office, let's say, and we became good friends, maybe one day, having a drink or at lunch or something where something shows on TV or it's in the other guy brings it up or whatever, something about UFOs or whatever. And I would say to someone, I mean, a close friend, I would say, I saw a UFO. All they would have to do is either smile or sneer or say, dude, come on, and I would not say one more word about it. I've never tried to convince anybody of anything. I've never tried to push it, and I don't talk about it. I really don't. I mean, even, like I said in the interview with Reinhardt, I've tried to tell my wife about this, and first thing my wife said to me was, "Were you drunk?" And that was the end of the conversation. I don't even want to talk about it because this is real, and I don't want to go down those paths. You either believe what I'm saying or you don't. But, don't blame it on drinking or drugs or, anything. It's nothing to be assigned to something else. This happened. So,
I've always wondered about that. I mean, all of us, I'm sure, on this podcast have had experiences with alcohol. I've never hallucinated. Two glasses of wine or beer or whatever. Do you ever see things? No, I never saw Bigfoot or a UFO or a ghost.
yeah,
You
no,
know?
I haven't, and I always laugh at that comment too because yeah, exactly what you said, Reinhardt. Like when you have a beer, even if you smoke weed, you're not seeing, bright green orbs like what you just described. Like that's ridiculous, right? Uh, but I, and if you are, I mean, give me some of that. No, but
Yeah, that's not just
no, it's
whiskey.
definitely not. But I also would say too that again, speaking to these folks that have done these deep dives into DMT and these hallucinogens. Again, I used to be one of those people where I'm like, you're tripping balls over there. Of course, you're going to see some crazy stuff, right? But as I research it more, and I have a couple books over there that are really good about psychedelics, and I'm even starting to wonder if when you take a psychedelic, whether it be DMT or psilocybin mushrooms or whatever, which I've never done anything. I'm the same as you, Reinhard. I've never taken a psychedelic. But I might cut this out because I don't know if he wants me to say this, but Josh, the producer of the show, has, and I've had like deep conversations with him. He's trying to come over to the States and have me do DMT with him, which I don't know if I would. I'm like very scared to do that if I'm being honest. But my point being, I'm starting to wonder if these psychedelics aren't like lowering the wall that we build up in our minds that allows us to process our day-to-day life.
Yeah.
And if when you are in psychedelics and you're seeing these colors and maybe even like a spirit or whatever you may see, which does tend to happen when you do these psychedelics, is that a manifestation in your mind only, or is it maybe that you're seeing the world and universe as it really is?
Yeah, as it really, I'm afraid of that stuff too. I'm definitely afraid of any kind of drugs, psychedelics. I'm afraid I'm going to end up like Art Linkletter's daughter, jump out of a window, I don't want to know. I don't want to see those things. It's terrifying because EB, if you don't mind me trespassing on your territory, one of the things that has come up to me, people who've read the book, is they'll ask me, why didn't EB get Nosis to discover what happened in those missing 3 or 4 hours? And I think you could describe that better than I could.
Why have I never done that?
Yeah.
What are they going to tell me that I don't know? I mean, what are they going to tell me? Yes, you encountered this thing. I mean, maybe the only thing they could tell me is whether or not any, negative occurred during it. Was there, was I abducted, or, did they do experiments on me or whatever? First of all, if that happened, I don't want to know. So what's the point then?
Yeah, exactly.
I wouldn't want to know. And what I do know and what I do remember, I don't need help with that. I mean, it's so clear to me right now. Um, I'm 68 years old now, and I've forgotten a lot of things. Not this. This is very vivid to me. And like I've told you, over the years, over the decades, I've tried to find that color green. And I've come to the conclusion, like I said to you, Reinhard, it doesn't exist here. That color does not exist. It's not on a paint chip, at Home Depot. It's not on a. I think the closest thing I think I told you was a blacklight poster, from the '60s.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Yeah, the Spencer's Gifts blacklight posters.
Maybe, but not really. So anyway, but see, I would know it if I saw it. It's so vivid to me. So but there were a couple of other things that I can mention that I think are pretty interesting. Again, leaving New York and going out west, I could not sleep at night. This was a thing that would happen to me every night, where sounds became extremely loud, from outside the house and inside the house. Now, that wasn't what was keeping me awake, but because I was awake, I was noticing that. So, for example, a cricket outside was deafening. And I think I said in the interview with Reinhardt that if somebody flushed the toilet on the other side of the house, it sounded like, we were in a submarine that was diving, or a plane was landing on the roof of the house or something. Things were just beyond loud, and I just could not sleep. But because I would have to be exhausted before I would fall asleep. And that was a real problem because I was living temporarily with my parents, and they were very old fashioned. And my mom I would fall asleep when she was waking up. And then she would just yell at me all day and not let me sleep, because she would say, you can't do this. What do you think? You think you're just going to sleep all day? That kind of thing. But I couldn't help it. I could not sleep. Another thing that was happening at that time was that I was having a real problem with perceiving things. So, for example, if you and I were talking right now, and you were talking to me and I was listening to you, and everything is beautiful and it's crystal clear, I hear you. While I was listening to you talk, if I looked down at the desk and started to write something, even if I was trying to write what you were telling me, as soon as I would look away from you talking and down at the paper, your voice would become noise. It would just become an unintelligible, muffled sound. And then I would look back up at you, and then it would be crystal clear. But as soon as I would look away, unintelligible noise. So I couldn't do both at the same time. But it wasn't just that example. Another example is if I went outside and looked up at the sky, if I saw a cloud first, then I didn't see the sky. I only saw the cloud. If I saw the sky, I didn't see the clouds. It was one or the other. It was your voice or the writing. It was the cloud or the sky. If I was in the car driving, I think I said this in the interview, it was very difficult to drive safely because I had to be laser focused on what was directly in front of me. Because if I just glanced out the side window, all I would see was whatever my eyes would pick up first. Everything else would blur out and be gone. So that was a problem that I went to a therapist for, and I went to a therapist for that and for the sleeping issue. And this kept on happening where I would go to someone, I would describe everything to them, and then at the end of the whole thing, they would say the same thing. The doctor up in northern New York, upstate New York, would say to me, "Oh, this is just profound stress. You're just having a tremendous amount of stress. That's why you can't sleep. That's why noises are louder than normal. That's why you can't focus. So you can hear me speak to you, but you can't look away and write because you're not focused, because you're experiencing too much stress." It was really aggravating to keep hearing anxiety and stress when, again, I was young and never really, that was not part of my life. That wasn't anything I was dealing with. Or that night, the next morning, actually, at breakfast, when it started. But the great thing that started happening right around the same time is a recurring dream. And it was one of the best things. I can't even build this up too big. It's not possible. It was one of the best things that ever happened to me, and it was one of the best feelings that I've ever had. And I was lucky enough to have it over and over and over again. And it was always exactly the same. I would have a dream where I would be sitting at the kitchen table in my parents' house, always wearing the same thing. It was a t-shirt, shorts, no shoes or slippers, sitting facing east, directly east, my back to the west, and eating a bowl of cereal. And as I was eating the bowl of cereal, I would hear a tone in the distance, and the tone was always coming from the south. And it would be getting a little bit closer and a little bit louder as I would hear it. And I would immediately recognize that tone, like a musical note, a tone. But it also had a certain amount of, I don't know, I want to say frequency to it. It had a, not a, maybe like a rumble type of frequency, like a low, like a bass to it. But it didn't.
Vibration.
Yes, but very minimal, but mostly it was the note, the tone. And as soon as I would hear that tone, I would get happy, but happy like impossible to duplicate. Just the greatest euphoric feeling. So good. I can't even compare it to anything. Just a wonderful feeling. Then in the dream, as soon as I would hear that tone, I would jump up from the table, run north out the door, across the gravel in my parents' front yard. I would get to the middle of the street. They lived on a cul-de-sac. I would get to the middle and turn around and look back at their house. And as soon as I would look at it, by the way, the tone was constant throughout. As soon as I would look at my parents' house, this flying flat object would come out from over their roof towards me at an impossibly slow speed. And I've described it as looking like a waffle, but without the little squares. It was very, it wasn't very deep. It didn't have a lot of height to it. It was perfectly flat, it was perfectly round, and it would just come out from over their house. And I would look at it and I would be very happy. And then that was the end. That was the end of the dream. But I would have that over and over and over again. And I would look forward to it. I couldn't wait to be able to finally be exhausted enough to fall asleep because I was hoping that it would come. What connection does the waffle have with the orb, the green orb? I don't know. Does it have something to do with it? I have no idea. The only thing I can say is that both of them were flying objects that don't exist in our world, and this thing was flying at a speed that was impossible, and again had no, methods of creating flight that we know of, but it was wonderful. It was great. I had that dream for years. Every time I had it, it was wonderful. And there was only one time that it happened slightly differently where it appeared someplace. And in the dream, I said, this isn't right. This can't be happening here. This is the wrong location. But other than that, it was exactly the same. The tone was the same. The waffle was the same. And my feeling was the same. And I really was disappointed when I noticed over a long period of time it started happening less frequently and then it stopped completely. And I haven't had that dream for years. And I wish I did. Because it was fantastic. And is it connected? Probably. Do I know how? I don't.
It almost sounds like a form of like lucid dreaming. Like you were in this dream and you were aware that you were dreaming, which I feel like is a weird. Like I don't think I've ever had a dream personally that I've like was aware that I was dreaming. But that's really bizarre. I remember reading that in the book, but I don't think I've ever heard of an experience like that related to like a UAP or a UFO encounter.
Yeah, it was great. And I recognized the tone. And the tone was instant happiness. Now, that tone didn't happen, to the best of my knowledge, did not happen the night in upstate New York when I had the encounter. That I don't remember that happening. It may have, I don't remember that, but I do know that I recognize that tone. Like every cell of my body recognized that tone. I don't know how to explain it, but that's just what it was.
That's interesting. I haven't researched that, but I wonder if there is science behind that, where like frequencies can trigger like states of being, like happiness, sadness, things like that. It sounds like that's something that might be a thing that's provable or that we can like test.
Well, I think I mean I know I talked to Reinhardt about this. It's interesting that you brought up that, that angle. Sound now in the way we live plays a part. I mean, we hear things and, we listen to music and we hear people talk and, you would really miss it if you weren't hearing everything. But sound isn't what it will be to us later. Sound will be so important in our everyday lives because it will be used for everything. Sound will be how things travel. Sound will be how we, fight wars. And sound will be how we will regulate people's moods. And it'll be everything. I mean, the objects will move because of sound, and people will be liquefied if on a battlefield because of sound. And sound's going to be everything at some point.
I had a recent epiphany about sound, well, more specifically music, I guess, in a recent episode, and we we're talking about how in church when you are with a group of people that are have this a single intention and they're singing a church song, even if you're not religious in any way and you're just there as an observer, you feel something. You feel something inside you that is moving that you can't, at least that I can't really pinpoint what it is, but it's like a good feeling. It makes you feel good because everyone is singing and has this intention. And I realized that the word music, the first part of that is muse. It's like it's something that can move you and inspire you. And yeah, I would imagine in that same regard, even just a single note. You know, Buddhist monks, they hit that gong when they begin meditation, and that I'm sure in their minds, it probably triggers them a state of calm because it's probably due to like a repetition. Like, every time they hear that, they probably start to meditate or whatever the case may be. But yeah, it's a really fascinating aspect to your story because, again, I've never really heard of someone having a dream like that or having an experience with a sound like that. And I think that there probably is some science behind it. So you had this dream, and eventually the dream faded. Was there anything else about your medical history that you wanted to bring up? Because I know there's quite a few things that have happened to you.
Yeah, a couple of more things. One is minor. Is I had a very minor, really fender bender in LA after when I moved here, and just out of caution, uh, I went to a doctor to get checked out, and I had a previous car accident. I got hit by a drunk driver and I hurt my neck and my lower back and stuff like that. So I didn't want to risk having, have some kind of injury that wouldn't be treated at that time. So I went to this doctor, and it was a one man office. He was this little old Russian guy. No, he didn't even have a secretary. He had nothing. It was him in an office with papers stacked halfway to the ceiling. And he examined me, and then he took an x-ray of my head and neck. And the machine that he used looked like it was from the original Frankenstein movie. I mean, it was that old. And it was actually a little bit scary because I was thinking this thing could be leaking radiation. I mean, this is an old machine that should probably be at a junkyard. So he took a head and neck x-ray. He came in the office. I was waiting, and he came in and he put it up on the light box, and he said, "Okay, I don't see anything. There's no fractures, there's nothing like that." He said soft tissue injuries you can't see with an x-ray. You may have whiplash, you may have some, muscle injury there. He said, "But I don't see anything significant." He said, "But there is one thing." He said, "I want to point this out to you." And he pointed to the left temporal area of my skull. And he said, "Look at this." And there was a shadow on the x ray in that area only. And he said, "This is an artifact." That's what it's called. It's just something that shows up on film. It doesn't mean anything. He said, "But I just wanted to show it to you. You're looking at it, and it's strange." He said, "But it's nothing to be concerned about because this could be anything. It could be the machine. It could be the piece of film. It could be anything." He said, "This type of x-ray does not penetrate your skull. You're not going to see your brain or anything on this x-ray. It's just your skull, and there's this shadow." So I was like, okay, great. And again, once again, did not put two and two together, but it was the left temporal skull, exactly where the white of hair was back in 1982 when I got my hair cut. And same spot, didn't think anything of it. Then in summer of 2000, so many years later, summer of 2000, I had a family member who was very ill. I started feeling ill as well. And I went to my doctor and I complained to him about how I was feeling. Something wasn't right. And he said, "No, you're fine. You just love that person so much. You're having sympathy symptoms." And I went back a couple of days later and I said, "Okay, I'm really not feeling right. I heard what you said. You're wrong. Something's wrong with me." And he disagreed. And I went back again. And when I went back again, he sent me to a psychiatrist who was in the same building. I went in there and I talked to him, and the psychiatrist said, "Look, you're a hypochondriac. Maybe you have somebody close to you that's very sick now. Is that a possibility? Yes, but it might just be a tremendous amount of anxiety. Maybe it's anxiety." And I said, "Oh, these people, like, stop. You're blaming everything on anxiety. I don't really have anything aside from this person who's sick that I care about. There's really nothing else happening to cause me that much stress." So I went back to my doctor and I told him, "That was really messed up that you sent me to a psychiatrist. Why don't you just believe me and check me out?" So he said, "Okay, I'm going to put you through a battery of tests that you're going to hate." He said, "I'm going to check literally everything. And then will you believe me?" And I said, "Yes." So he put me through hell. And then I was in my office. He called me one afternoon and he said, "Okay, now I have all the results back." He said, "You have a brain tumor that needs to be checked out by neurologist or neurosurgeon." And I thought I was going to jump out the window at my office. Like, whenever you hear brain tumor, you immediately think death. So, or at least I do. So, he made an appointment for me. I went to go see a neurosurgeon who had my MRI films, and he said, "Okay, here it is." And he pointed me to it on the light box. There it was, left temporal lobe of my brain, the exact same spot as the white patch of hair, exact same spot as the artifact on the X-ray many, many years before. And the tumor itself was the same size as an egg. He said, "We're going to take it out." And I said, "Wait a minute." My doctor said, "We're going to watch it." And he said, "Why watch it? It's so easy for me to get to this now. Don't wait till it causes more problems for you. Let me take it out now." So I agreed to it. They removed it, and the hole that they had to saw out of my skull in order to remove it was exactly in the same place, of course, as the white spot in my hair and the artifact. And then they had to put a titanium bracket there to hold my skull in place. It's right here. All of these things are all, everything is always this spot, this spot. I started then to put two and two together, and I started saying, wait a minute, I have an entire body for these things to manifest in, and they're not. Everything is coming back to this spot, this spot, this spot. And Reinhard can tell you, once, a couple of years ago, I had to have skin cancer removed here. And 3 weeks ago, skin cancer removed here. Everything happens on that one spot. And the last medical thing that I can definitely tell you is that I now have, as a result of the scar tissue from the surgery, I have what's called left temporal lobe epilepsy. So I have my left temporal lobe now puts out a different amount of electricity as the other parts of my brain, which can cause various types of hallucinations and sensations that are controlled by medication. So I take medication twice a day for that. But that condition would not have happened without the surgery. The surgery would not have happened without, I don't know. So I started to then begin to believe that being in such close proximity to that object, the orb, all those years ago, either radiation or something hit me on that spot, because everything happens on that spot. And if you look up, like, the type of tumor I had is called a meningioma. If you look it up, you'll see that doctors will say, we don't know what causes that, but we do believe that a exposure to an intense amount of radiation can cause that. That's one of the things they do believe, but they don't know what causes it. But it's a non-cancerous thing, thank God. Good here. And but these things all then, to me, tie together finally. And then there's just three more things. I'll make them quick. One is that Jack, my friend from school that summer of 1982, passed away. Very young. We would keep in touch, not frequently, but every now and then. And every time I contacted him, whether it was on the phone or by email or by like message through Facebook, I would say, hi, and he would say hi. And then I would say, do you remember that night? And he would cut me off and just go, yes, I do remember. I specifically remember. And he would start telling me about it. So, and I'm not kidding when I say I would ask him constantly, every time I talk to him, do you remember this? And then, do you remember when this happened? And do you remember the night of 4th of July when we were together, et cetera, et cetera. So that always made me feel good that he backed me up with that. What I'm getting at is that over the years I was in contact with him, and I always brought it up first. But it wasn't like, hey, do you remember the UFO story, blah, blah. No, it wasn't like that. I would say, do you remember that night? And then he would take it from there. So it was his memory, not mine. And it wasn't leading questions. It was just, let me start you off at a certain place. The other thing is that something started happening to me in the 80s that still happens kind of rarely now, but was happening a lot, which is, again, I would get up in the middle of the night, always in the middle of the night, never happened during the day. And I would stand at the window in my bedroom, and I would just stand there and look out the window, waiting for the thing that was creating the rumbling sound in the distance to arrive. And it never came. And my wife, I would say, is a light sleeper. She would wake up and she would say, what are you doing? And I would say, I'm looking. And I would say to her, don't you hear that? And she would say, no. And I would say, it sounds like a truck is coming, or there's some kind of low rumbling. Something is right up the road. It's coming. And it never came. It wouldn't matter if I stood there for 10 minutes or an hour or two. Nothing ever showed up, but I would hear the rumbling. It would make me get out of bed and stand at the window and look for it. And it never came. So it got to the point where she wouldn't even think it was weird that I was standing there looking out the window waiting for the thing to arrive, but it never did arrive.
It just became the normal the normal thing for EB to be standing at the window looking out.
Yeah, just looking out, but and always in the middle of the night. And the last thing I will bring up is that over the years, I tried to get in touch with Delilah, and she wasn't happy about it, and I wasn't exactly sure why she was moody about it. But I did try to get in touch with her over a period of a few years. I would write letters to her. She lived in Indianapolis, and I would write letters and send them. She never wrote back to me. So in the late 80s, I happened to be in Indianapolis with my brother on a business trip. It was his business. I was just with him. And I looked her family up in the phone book and I called her parents' house and I asked for her and I said, "My name is so and so, and I was friends with your daughter, and can you please tell me how I can get in touch with her?" And her mother said, "She's here. She's here tonight. She's having dinner with us." And I thought, wow, this is great. So she said, "Let me get her." So she got on the phone and I said, "Hi, how are you?" And she said, "Okay," not very friendly. And I said, "Listen, do you remember that night?" And she stopped me and said, "Listen, I'm an assistant attorney general for the state of Indiana. The last thing I need is for my coworkers to think I'm a crackpot." I say this every time I talk to Reinhardt about it. I don't use the word crackpot. That was her word. She said crackpot. It was a very short call. She wasn't very friendly. I told her I just wanted to say hi and see how she was, and that was it. Well, with the advent of the internet and email, I started writing to her every now and then. I would write to her at her office. She had a law office. And I would email her and ask her, "Listen, I don't know why you're mad at me. I don't know why you won't talk to me. I've tried to talk to you over the years. Please just tell me what you remember. That's all I want to know. I don't want to know anything else. I'm not trying to pry into your personal life. I just want to know." She never wrote back to me. And I sent these emails. I sent some of them to Reinhardt to over the that showed the time, the date stamps on them, so he could see that they were from years ago. That I was always asking her exactly the same thing. "Please just tell me what you remember about that night." She never answered me. So when Reinhardt and I did this interview in the winter of 2024, I wrote to her one more time. Whatever it is that I did, I apologize. I have no idea. But we were really good friends and we experienced something together that I've never, done with anyone else before or since. And I just want to talk to you about it. Can you please just answer my email? And she wrote back to me. It was the first time ever. She wrote back and she said, "Okay, let's talk." And I wrote back and said, "I will talk to you anytime you're available." And she gave me a date and a time. And I called her and we talked for an hour. The first half, I recorded it on a dictaphone. It's weird the way I did it. I drove out of my neighborhood. I parked. I talked to her on speakerphone and I recorded the call on a dictaphone because I was afraid if I tried to do it some way that she knew I was recording her, she'd hang up. So I just told her I was driving and I talked to her on speakerphone. And so for the first half hour, excuse me, of the call, all we talked about was life since 1982. Married, children, school, profession. It was just like catching up. And then I asked her, "Why have you never answered me? Why were you so mad at me?" And she said, I wasn't mad at you." I said, "But you never answered me." And she said, I don't know why. I mean, I don't know what to attribute it to. Maybe I just felt like there was no point to it. But, she was married, I was married, but she wouldn't know that. But she said, no, there was no real reason for it. And I said, "Well, what do you remember about our friendship?" And she said, "No, we had a great friendship." And I said, "What do you remember about me leaving?" And she said, "I thought it was mysterious." That was the word she used. "I thought it was mysterious. Something wasn't just like out in the open about it." And I said, "Okay." And then I said, "Now, what do you remember about that night at the end of June 1982 when it was really hot in the dorm room? What do you remember?" And she started telling me, and she remembered. She said, "We left. We went to the Waterfall." Right. "And what did we do there?" "We stood under the waterfall to cool off." "Okay, you remember that. You remember the plants that I told you there were plants that were glowing?" And she said, "Yeah, I remember that." I said, "And then what? What do you remember after that?" And she said, nothing. I said, you don't remember anything significant that happened out there that night? And she said, no. She said, why don't you tell me what it was? Because I have no memory of it. So I told her, just the way I described it to you. And she said, I would think that if something like that happened, I would remember. It's so startling. I think I would remember. And I said, yeah, I think you would remember too. And that's why I feel like crying right now, because you're not backing me up. You're not remembering this at all. And she said, well, I'm sorry. I don't. And then I said, okay, there's two things now. One is, do you remember the breakfast? Do you remember us at breakfast? When I said, I don't remember how we got here, she said, yes, I do remember that. She remembered that. I said, do you remember how we got there? No. Do you remember us going back to the dorm? No. Do you remember getting changed for breakfast? No. So I said, so you remember going to the waterfall with me, but you don't remember anything happening there out of the ordinary, but you also don't remember anything after that until breakfast. So that was, for lack of a better word, that was comforting to me. But then the other thing about it that was really, I think, great relief to me was that I asked her about the phone call in the late 1980s when I said, do you remember that night? I said, you stopped me abruptly and said, I'm an assistant attorney general for the state of Indiana. I can't afford for my coworkers to think I'm a crackpot. And she said, yes, that sounds like me. And I remember that call. I said, do you remember me asking you? Yes. Do you remember you telling me that you didn't want to talk about it? Yes. And I said, well, what was it that happened that would make your coworkers think you were a crackpot? Like, what would you tell them that would make you think you were a crazy person? And she said, I don't know. I said, well, it had to have been something, because you refused to answer. You wouldn't even let me finish the question. You were afraid people would, you were nuts. So what was it? She said, I don't know. So this is really the last thing. And that is, I think she proved my point in a way, because she remembered enough in the late 80s that she was afraid to talk to me about something, because people would think, she thought it would hurt her career, hurt her credibility as a lawyer. She doesn't remember it now, but she obviously remembered it then. Now, I don't know. Do you understand what I'm saying?
I do, yeah. Yeah, it's well, first off, I'll say for both you and Reinhardt, it gives me a lot of trust in both of you that you put that in the book and you just discussed it now, because going back to what we were saying earlier, if you were just trying to make up this story for whatever reason, Delilah, whoever she is, would have certainly just remembered it and recalled it. Like, reading the book, I was hoping in a way that she would corroborate the story, and that, it would end on this, like, for lack of a better phrase, like a positive note, that you had some justification in your story. And that is not how it ended, as you just described. But in the same way, like you just said, and I guess I'll ask you this question, because I don't remember reading it in the book. Do you think that she truly doesn't remember, or do you think that she is? I hate to use the word lying, but do you think that she's maybe trying to, like, safeguard herself?
No, she's at the end of her professional career now. But she's an attorney. She's a private attorney, so she doesn't work for the state. And she's way beyond that. So do I think she's lying? No. Do I think she's covering up? No. I think she honestly does not remember. Our conversation was very, candid and open, and nothing to lose. She has nothing to lose. But what I think so no, I don't think she's lying. What I do think 100% is that backwards kind of way, it does corroborate my story because, like I said, when I called her in the late 80s, 6 or 7 years after, she remembered. And why would she be afraid to talk to me about it on a phone call when no one could hear her except maybe her parents?
Yeah.
She had so much fear to even discuss it with me on a private phone call. So she cut me off midway through the question. She wouldn't even let me finish the sentence. To me, that proves she remembered and didn't want to talk about it.
Do you think that it's in a similar way to how you were right after the incident, where you remembered the aura, but you didn't want to like attribute the things that were happening to you to that experience that you had? Do you think that she had some of that where she remembered it, but maybe she remembered it in like bits and pieces, or she didn't remember the whole thing, or
She actually said, "You know what? Maybe I should get hypnotized." I mean, I think that's in the interview. I think that's in the book that she
I remember
said,
that.
yeah, she said, maybe I should get hypnotized because maybe then I'd remember. And I said to her, well, I'm not a fan of that, concept. So, I can't tell you what to do, but I said, you don't have to do that. That's what happened to us. And, you don't need to say anything more than you don't know why you cut me off on the phone. That was enough for me. It was enough for me for her to just say, I don't know why I did that to you back then. Well, I do, because she had different memories than I did and she didn't want to talk about it. Nothing else happened. Nothing bad happened out there. Nothing bad happened the entire time that we knew each other. So, um, by the way, I also told her during the call that I had been in contact with our mutual friend, Jack, over the years, and that he had no problem remembering everything we talked about back then. And that actually made her feel, I think it made her feel bad that I remembered, he remembered, and she doesn't. I think, Reinhardt, I think you asked me whether or not I asked her if during that call, if she had any health situations that might similar, and I think you asked me that, and my answer was I didn't feel like I could ask her that. I felt like it was too invasive to say, tell me about your personal health over the years. So I didn't ask. But I really didn't feel like there was anything else I needed to ask.
Yeah, because you got your closure essentially that you were looking for. It seemed like, at least somewhat.
Yeah, and her weirdness about that call was enough for me, because there was really no reason, you know, it would be the same thing as if I called you tomorrow and said, by the way, about the podcast, and you said, I don't want to talk about it. People are going to think I'm crazy.
Yeah.
Why?
Yeah.
Why?
The only thing that I again, spirit of transparency, that I am struggling with, even when I read the book, was so back in the 80s when she didn't want to talk about it, and she did the whole crackpot comment, she clearly remembered what happened. She didn't want to say. And then fast forward to last year when you spoke to her, she didn't remember. And I feel like now she's not lying, but you would think, I know if that's happened to me, even if it was 40 years ago, I'd imagine I would remember that night, at least bits and pieces of it. So if she's not lying, do you just think that she just didn't want to talk about it and she was giving you the clues, or do you think she just truly didn't remember?
I think she didn't remember, but I think she didn't remember for the same reason I didn't remember at breakfast how we got there. Because look, in that conversation, I hadn't talked to her since the late 80s. So many years ago, almost 40 years ago, right?
Yeah.
And she says, no, I remember it was hot in the room. And I remember we walked down there. And I remember we stood under the waterfall. And yes, I remember all of that. And yeah, I do remember us at breakfast. And I remember that we didn't know how we got there. That's enough. So so what? How often does that happen to you, Delilah? Please tell me, how often does it happen that there's a period of hours that you have no memory of, and you add that to you not willing to let me finish a sentence because you didn't want people to think you were crazy? You're telling me everything in a roundabout way in those statements, but I don't think she was lying. I don't think she remembered it
Do
at
you think it's
all.
more of like a subconscious thing? Like she doesn't quite know what happened, but there's a level to it that she knows what happened, but it's like an amnesia kind of situation. I'm just trying to understand, you know, how someone cannot remember that, but remember it in the 80s, or at least know something happened. Does that make sense what I'm asking?
Something happened because she remembered the breakfast and how freaked out we were.
Oh, okay.
So
I see.
something, what I'm saying is she said enough to convince me that for whatever was missing from her memory, there's a reason for it. I don't know what it is, but she was there with me. We experienced the same thing together. She remembers bits and pieces. I mean, she remembers that night. And oh, by the way, I'll tell you something that's funny that she said on the call. And she said, we were out there in the middle of the night. She said, I'm in my bathing suit, you're in your shorts, we're standing under a waterfall, and we're all alone. And she said that would have been, if we would have had a different kind of friendship, that would have been the perfect time to have an amazing, like, romantic interlude. Like, you couldn't
Sure.
even build it better than that.
Yeah, it's true.
And yeah. And I was like, wow, you know what? You are remembering how you felt in that moment. It's every little thing that she said to me proved to me. I mean, maybe you don't, or maybe you don't believe it, but everything she said to me made me believe, wow, you have really accurate memories of details from that night and from the next morning, and you have nothing in between.
Yeah, it's not, just to be clear, it's not that I don't believe it. It's that this, to kind of going back to what we were saying earlier, in my dumb human brain, I want there to be the ending of the story where Delilah remembers everything, and she remembered seeing the orb for 30 minutes, and like that's what my human instinct wants that to happen. But oh so often in this phenomenon, probably even part of the reason why you don't want to show your face or kind of be public about it is because of situations like this with Delilah, where the phenomenon seems to be so weird sometimes, like this, where memories are lost, things are, this happens when you're high, or like just there's holes in the story just enough where it makes people that are super skeptical not believe and just like say, they're crackpots, like to use Delilah's example, right? So it's not that
Yeah.
I don't believe, it's just for you, clearly, it's enough proof because she remembers that night. And that's enough proof for you because you were there and you experienced everything. So you're like, okay, that night did happen, and it's a puzzle piece for you in your mind. But as an onlooker, or as someone on the outside, it's one of those situations. Like if you know the Bob Lazar story, it's the fact that he doesn't have, or there's no record of him working at his, was it EG&G Labs or whatever it was. That's like the sticking point. They're like, oh, if we just had that proof, Bob Lazar's story would be true, if you're familiar with it. And this is kind of like that. If Delilah just remembered that night, oh, it's like the critical part, But it really isn't. It really isn't the critical part. I guess is what I'm trying to say. It's just how my brain is manifesting it, I guess. I don't know. I'm sure people are thinking of that too that are listening.
Well, Wouldn't it have been great if after all those years I would have gotten her on the phone and asked her and she would have said yes and told it to me the way I told it to you? That would have been awesome. And then the book would have a different ending and people could just say, wow, that's amazing. Except for two things. One, that's not what happened, and I'm not going to lie about it. And two, for the people who don't believe what I'm saying, they wouldn't believe that either.
That's
You
true.
know, they don't know her. So, I mean, I barely know her. I don't know her at all now. So, what I'm saying is that someone could read that and someone who doesn't believe or doesn't, isn't a fan of this topic would just go, "No, that's all bullshit. He's lying and she's lying."
Isn't that convenient that Delilah remembered that night too? Oh, it's such a happy ending. People would be saying that exact thing, I think, as well. I think you're right.
Here's the thing though. I told Reinhard in the moment, I'm really disappointed that she didn't just blurt it out. I'm very disappointed about that. Like I said, I wanted to cry because after all these years, I was expecting it and she didn't say it. But I do have the dictaphone with an hour-long conversation on it. And why, after all these years, would we even have had that conversation? Like, what would I be trying to prove from 1982 until 2024? I'm going to get this random person who's not even in my life to get on the phone with me to back me up on a story that I made up. Like, what would the optimum or optimal outcome be of that call? You would have somebody go, "What the hell are you talking about?"
Yeah. Even nowadays, even if you go back to 1982 and snap a picture of it or a video of it, even then people would say it's AI or whatever. It's like there's no way to prove these things at the current moment. It seems like, unfortunately.
Well, and there never has been.
No, but it's like what a great practical joke that I set up in 1982 that I was going to get on the phone with her 42 years later and ask her a question about something that didn't happen. Wow. That's a lot of trouble to go to for nothing.